So I don't know if you've realized this yet or not. There are things in life that you are just going to have to do, whether you want to or not, right? This is what it means to kind of be an adult. It's why I put a sign up in my place that says, "Don't grow up, it's a trap." They don't tell you that when you're a kid. When you're a kid, you think you're going to grow up, you're going to have freedom, and you're going to have money that you can do whatever you want with, and that is not how it goes. There's just things that you gotta get up and you gotta grind through. You don't want to, you don't always feel like you need to, sometimes might feel like you ought to, but you always have to. And even if you're not an adult, there's this little thing called school. And I know that some of you in Wisconsin, you're still waiting for that magic place to reopen. It's coming sooner than you want, I'm sure, but you have to do it. The alarm is gonna go off, you're gonna wanna smash it, you're going to have to go get dressed. You're going to have to eat breakfast. You're going to have to get on the bus or get in the car and commute to work. And you're going to have to do that thing for a certain amount of hours. And then you're going to go home and you get a little bit of a break. Then you go to sleep. You wake up and start over. And that's kind of what life can feel like you're caught in this endless cycle. And because of that, all of the things that are part of the have-to category start to feel kind of meaningless. They're just check boxes that we're trying to get done with so we can move on with whatever is next, which is usually more of the same. So when you bump into somebody in the hallway at work or here at church or out in the neighborhood, you might say like, "Hey, how's it going? How are you doing?" And they'll say things like, "I'm just surviving. I'm getting through. I'm awake. I'm on the right side of the ground." And when you listen to all those things, you're like, this is what this is amounting to? It's like we're just making it through. We're just kind of taking one day at a time and just enough to get through it. Not super exciting, not super meaningful. The problem is we're starved for meaning. We want this all to be significant. We want it all to matter. We all want it to be pointing in some kind of direction, which is why some of my friends who are runners and insane say things like, if you want to get into running, you need to sign up for a race, which feels backwards to me. If I don't like running, I'm not going to sign up for a thing that I got to pay to do then. But they say if you have the race on the calendar, well, then all of a sudden these runs that you have to go through, the practice races, they have meaning because they're preparing you for the big race. So imagine if you and I could take some of the everyday stuff that we've got to work through, that we've got to accomplish, that we've got to do to pay the bills, so on and so forth. If we could take that and we could point it at something, like a race, like we're gonna be getting ready for this bigger thing, and that might change this thing right in front of me that I have to do today but don't want to do, but I know I ought to do and have to do. I think that might change the dynamic altogether. I think what we might realize is that some of our have-tos could have meaning. In fact, I would argue that all of our have-tos could. The things you can't get out of, because, spoiler alert, at no point in this message am I going to tell you should quit your job. Wouldn't it be awesome, though, if you were like, part of following Jesus is that you quit your job and you don't have to work anymore? But that's not really the case. In fact, it's the total opposite of that mentality. But I think our job could be different without having to go get another one. I think the job that we currently have, or the school that we're currently attending, the homework we're currently trying to get done, that could all have meaning without changing anything other than what we're aiming it at. Just changing not what we do, but who we're doing it for can make all of the difference. But before we jump into the passage that we're going to look at today, I want to take a side road that I think might be helpful in general when you read the Bible, but especially today. And it's the moments when the Bible talks about uncomfortable things, because it does it all the time. You don't have to get very far into it where you come across a sentence or two where you're like, why is that in there? And why isn't more said about that thing to express God's disdain for that thing? Why does it seem like it's just there and nobody's doing anything about it? It could be something like when you're reading in the Old Testament and you come across this angry God that at times feels like he's condoning the execution of people when he wrote the rule book at the beginning that said, thou shalt not murder. And then later in some of the stories we read, the historical accounts, it feels like he backtracked on that. And then when you compare that to Jesus, who says you shouldn't even be angry at your enemies and you should pray for them, it feels like this mismatch, it doesn't all add up kind of thing. Another part is where you might read, especially in the Newer Testament, their view of women and what women were invited to or forbidden from. It's totally different than how we view women today. And that change has been so good and so right. But when we look at it in the Bible, we're like, well, why doesn't it say something negative about that reality? The passage we're going to look at today talks about slavery. And for us, that is a horrible, wretched word and should be. And then it shows up in the Bible and there's no like, thou shalt not do slavery verse. And so it feels like, is God cool with that? Does God like that? These are the moments where like I'm uncomfortable with what I'm reading. I don't know what to do with that. So I want to give you two thoughts that I hope anytime you see those, but especially today, you can find some peace in reading it. First, culture was different then. That's just a fact. Our culture in the 21st century versus the culture in the first century or BC are not the same. And the scriptures were written by specific people at specific times in history when things were different. They exist in that reality. So this was not a magic fairy tale book that somebody found in the middle of the woods. It's steeped in the reality of the course of human history. But I'm convinced the second thing is, in that difference, there are principles that we're able to pull out and apply to our lives. And if we were to spend the time mining for those, we would find the bridges that move between the cultures, where we could go, okay, it's not totally the same in my day and age, but that thing that they're talking about does. The center of it, the principle behind it, more than, say, the procedure of what was going on in culture, that principle translates. The reality is that takes more effort. It's not as simple as I'm just going to read it and move on with my day. I'm going to have to actually read it. I'm going to have to make some observations. I'm going to have to think through what are the differences and how do they translate and what does this mean for me today. So when we read today about slavery and masters in Paul's letter to the Christians in a town called Colossae, for me, the principle that we can pull out of that is how we do work, how we work for our employers. And I think you're going to find that as we work through this, you go, okay, I don't necessarily love this principle because it's difficult, but it might be the thing that could change everything for me. So sometimes you have to do these like mining practices to get through the presenting words and get to the principle behind those words. And here's what I've found. As we read through this passage from Colossians, it's this principle that comes out to me. It means more when you know who it's for. And by it, I mean whatever your have to is. For most of us, that's going to be our job. Some of you got a job when you were 15 and you've never looked back, right? You have been working every weekday and sometimes every weekend for all of your life. And there's not even a light at the end of the tunnel. Retirement's a hope for someday for a lot of us, right? And so what would it take for us to understand who that's for? And in that is the idea that it might not be for who we think it's for. That maybe you and I could stop working for our bosses and for our paychecks, and that we could start working for something far more meaningful. And that might change how you feel when the alarm goes off tomorrow. So we're going to look at a few paragraphs from Paul, who wrote Colossians. We're going to jump in towards the end of what we've called chapter 3, and I always throw that out there because Paul did not sit down and write chapter 3. We put those in the years and centuries after Paul wrote this letter to this church. It's just meant so that we can find where we're at when we're going to read the scriptures together like we do here every single week. So, Colossians chapter 3, verse 22 reads like this: Slaves, obey your earthly masters in everything you do. Try to please them all the time, not just when they're watching you. First sentence, we get something good because we all do what he's talking about at work. When the cat's away, the mice will play, right? You know that when your boss is not in town, work's going to feel a little bit different because there's nobody looking over your shoulder. There's nobody watching you, so you can play a little more solitaire, right? Play a little more Minesweeper. That's for those of us from the 1900s back. But we can do a little bit more. So my first job, my senior year of high school, and then just a little bit into the second half of that year, I worked for Blockbuster Video. Anybody laughing remembers the good old days of having to go and rent a video and bring it home and maybe even rewind it. Ask your parents, high school kids. So I worked there, and I had a great boss. She was super cool. But I loved when I worked and she didn't. Because I wasn't on my toes. I didn't feel like I was walking around on eggshells like, this is the boss. She could fire me if I'm not doing what I'm supposed to do. My main job, by the way, was returning videos to the shelves. So they would get returned in that slot, and we'd have to make sure they were rewound, and we'd scan them back into the library, and then we'd have to go place them on the shelf. And one of the most frustrating things was being unable to find where that movie is supposed to go. I got more steps in working at Blockbuster than I have at any other point in my life, because you're just looking for this one movie, especially if there's just one copy. So if you ever went to Blockbuster or any movie place and you found like the cover, but you couldn't find, the video wasn't behind it was usually my fault. Because the boss wasn't working. And I'm like, nah, nobody will care. And I'll just stick it behind a random one. It's scanned back in, but I don't want to take the time. I never did that when my boss was there, though. We behave differently. We do really well when they're watching, maybe not as well when they aren't. And Paul's going to say, no Blockbuster mentality for anybody that's going to follow Jesus. You're going to do it different. When your boss isn't watching, when your teacher isn't watching, you are still going to work as if they were. This is the part where we go, oh man, this following Jesus thing is way harder than I think. Because Paul says everything you do, all of the time, maybe not even just working. When you're parenting and you're doing the chores at home, like washing the floor, folding the clothes, doing the dishes, cooking the meals, mowing the grass, you fill all these things in, going to work, going to school. He says, all of that you do different. We don't play this game of when somebody important or somebody that could benefit us is watching, we give it our best effort. We are going to give it our best effort all of the time. And this is where I get this idea that I've been talking about for a long time, and most of the time people don't love when I say this. But I believe with all my heart that Jesus followers should be the best employees at every company. I really do. Not because we're super nice, not because we're just obedient, not because we're never like the source of the problem in the office, but because we come with our fullest effort and energy every time. I think that Christians should be the kind of people where the boss might go, I don't believe anything that they believe. In fact, I think they're crazy to believe that a God made all this and that he loves them and died for them and all that. But I wish I had 100 of them working for me. Because they show up with their best effort. And I can leave, I can go away on a trip, and I can trust that they're going to show up as if I were sitting and standing over their shoulder. I think Paul says, no matter what you do, all of the time, best effort. The problem is, we don't want to give our bosses our best effort because our bosses can be jerks. Our bosses and our teachers can feel like they don't really care about us. So, how do we justify that? It's just not natural for us to want to give somebody something better than what they give us. And Paul begins to address that as he continues on. This is what he says next. Serve them sincerely because of your reverent fear of the Lord. Work willingly at whatever you do. Paul is a compartment buster. He's going, I know, the whole Jesus thing is really comfortable and works really well when you're at church. But just like you don't want to bring your boss to church with you, most of us would go, I don't want to bring my God to work with me. And Paul says, but he's everywhere with you anyway. And so the reason you bring your best effort is not because your boss deserves it. It's not because your manager is so great and wonderful. It's not necessarily because you like your job or what you do. It's because you have a healthy respect, or what Paul says, a fear of the Lord. Because of your relationship with Jesus, that's why you show up the way you do. That's why you're the best employee, the most trusted employee, the one that they rely on for the big project because they know you're going to come through. They know you're not skimming off the top. They know you're not cutting corners. You show up with maximum effort every time. So Paul says you should work sincerely and willingly. In other words, honestly, with enthusiasm and your whole heart. Do not answer this question out loud. Do not elbow your neighbor. But when was the last time you went to work sincerely and willingly? When was the last time you got on the chore list at home sincerely and willingly? When was the last time, students, that you did your homework sincerely and willingly with your whole heart and enthusiasm and honesty? Don't worry. If you're like, I'm glad you didn't ask me to answer that out loud. Everybody in the room is trying to rack their brain to remember that time. But for those of us that follow Jesus, our answer, we need to get to the place where our answer is yesterday, this morning. Every time I show up, I give him my best. So for Paul, ultimately for Jesus, how we work is way more important than anything else. It's more important than where we work. It's more important than for whom we work or how much we work for or any of those things. How we do what we do matters most. Because see, so often we think that we just don't like our job, we don't like our coworkers, we don't like our boss, so we need to go find other ones. And Paul would say, you're going to be looking for a long time. So what if you just stopped and said, I'm going to change the way I approach it, the way I engage in it, the way I do it? And I think he would go so far as to say, you need to change who you do it for. Because listen to what he says next. Work as though you were working for the Lord rather than for people. Rather than your boss, rather than your manager, rather than your spouse, rather than your parents, rather than your teacher, you did it all as if it were for Jesus. Now, I don't know about you, but my effort goes through the roof if it's for the King of Kings. And not because he's mean and scary, but because he's awesome and wonderful. He is the king. I would absolutely scrub that floor a little more intensely. I would absolutely get that project done early. I would not complain about a TPS report because the king asked me. The king asked me to do that. Jesus chose me to do whatever I'm doing. That fundamentally rearranges the whole thing. When I'm working for the Lord, and the beautiful thing is, you do not need to fill out an application and go find a new employer. This can start tomorrow. This can start for some of you, you've got to go to work this afternoon. Who you do this for is up to you. You can't maybe change your boss. You can't maybe change their ranking or the fact that you have to be accountable to them, but you can change ultimately who you're doing this for. Reframe that and rearrange that. And when you do that, I believe, when you change it to the king instead of the boss, instead of the teacher, instead of the principal, all of a sudden, you're not working anymore. You're serving. You can serve the king instead of serving the boss, the manager, the paycheck, the bills, all of those things. You can serve the king. Where you go, it's a pleasure. You might think you work at Chick-fil-A all of a sudden. You're just, my pleasure. My pleasure. Jesus, if this is what you want me doing today, if this is who you want me doing this for, my pleasure. All of a sudden, your meaningless job has meaning. And this isn't like, hey, what if we thought about this? Imagine that. This is God himself saying how you should function as a follower of Jesus. The good news is, if you're here today and you are not a follower of Jesus, you're off the hook. You don't got to worry about this. And you can hold the rest of us accountable that say we are Christians. That we should be showing up with our very best, not because our boss deserves it, but because our king asks for it. Changes how I go to work. Changes how I drive. Changes how I parent. Changes how I cook the meal that nobody wants. So Paul starts to wrap the idea up with these words. He says, remember that the Lord will give you an inheritance as your reward, and that the master you are serving is Christ. Isn't it amazing that this passage starts by talking about slaves and masters in a literal sense, and by the end, Paul has rearranged those definitions, and the master he refers to now is Jesus. And all of a sudden, those words carry different weight. This is that idea that Paul is going to change the institution from within, which is a lot of what we're invited to do all day, every day. We change the institutions, we change the society, we change the culture from within. We don't need to wage war necessarily, because we can just show up as citizens of the kingdom, as servants to the king, and do it different. We do it different. And the promise is that while you do a lot of your job today for a reward, and let's just be honest about that, we go to work because we need money. We go to work to make money. You've got bills to pay. You've got a car to drive, a mortgage to live under, right? You've got all these things that, ready or not, you got to write a check for. You got to do a withdrawal for, which means you need to put something in there every once in a while, so we go to work. A lot of the times, the reason we change jobs is because the next job pays more. We're willing to put up with even a worse boss sometimes because the paycheck's going to be better. We go to work for a reward. And the good news is that Paul says when you do work for the king, you get one. He calls it an inheritance. And the beauty of that inheritance is that it is eternal. I don't know if you've noticed this, but the reward you're getting for your temporary work of the week doesn't last long. Especially when eggs cost like $5 for 12 of them, right? Think about this. The dollar you earned on Friday is not as valuable today. Like, it's just very temporary. It's going to go away, and that's why you got to go back and earn more, and go back and earn more, and maybe change jobs, because now you got to make even more, and you're trying to get your job to handle this life that you've built. And Paul goes, you can't quit your job, but you could do your job for something better. This inheritance that's not temporary, but eternal. This inheritance that you can't lose, that doesn't depreciate, and is yours forever and always. And it's not even necessarily because you earned it. It's because you're loved. And imagine doing a job every day for that. Paul says it's not just about the reward, but understand the ruler. Your master, who is Christ, the one who loves you unconditionally, went the furthest for you who shows up for you, who knows your name, knows your strengths, knows your weaknesses, and invites you to be part of something with him that's bigger than you. That significance that we're all struggling to find, he says, it can be yours. Because I'm the King of Kings. I'm the boss of bosses. I'm the leader of leaders. Why don't you be part of what I'm doing? And you don't have to change jobs. You don't have to move to another city. It's right there. You just have to change what this right here is aimed at. So for Paul, it's way more about who you work for than what you do. It's way more about who you work for than what you do. I think sometimes we think, if I'm going to do something for Jesus, well, I got to go do like what Josh does or what the staff does. I got to go work at a church. Like that's when you're working for Jesus. But you are too. Because you represent him in whatever office you find yourself in, whatever classroom you find yourself in. And you are invited to do all of that for him and not for them. And they will thank you and appreciate you and recognize you when you do. So here's what's amazing. This section that we've been looking at in the end of what we call chapter 3 is right in the middle of a whole discussion about family. So Paul's addressing how husbands and wives should relate to each other, how parents and children should relate to each other. And so this idea, this institution that existed in the first century is more in terms of like family and how we relate. And that part comes under the beginning of how he starts the whole section off. Way back in verse 1, and this is what he writes. He says, "Since you have been raised to new life with Christ, set your sights on the realities of heaven, where Christ sits in the place of honor at God's right hand." Have you ever noticed that whatever you're looking at is where you end up going? Thank God for lane assist warnings in our cars now. Because you'll be driving along and something is over on the side of the road and you're looking at that and all of a sudden you're in another lane and you did not intend to get there. Because your body will naturally follow whatever it is that you're looking at. You used to have this happen when you were on your bike. Pretty girl, hot dude on the side of the road, you're looking and all of a sudden you crash into the mailbox in front of them, right? Like this is just how it works. And so Paul says, set your sights on things of heaven, set your sights on something eternal, and watch how life seems to naturally line up behind that. This is the race that the runners say you should sign up for. Because they're saying, set your sights on that, you will naturally want to work towards that. And so Paul says, set your sights on heaven, and you will naturally want to work towards that. You will naturally want that to become the reality more and more in which you live and work and move. And that's amazing. That we don't have to go out and buy something. We don't have to go out and get something. We don't have to achieve something. We just have to change what we're aimed at. We just have to change what our jobs are aimed at. And the next sentence crystallizes the idea. He says, think about the things of heaven, not the things of earth. And by the way, this is not Paul saying the whole earth is going to you-know-where in a handbasket, so forget it and don't care about it and don't be involved or any of that stuff. Just wait to get to heaven. He's not fatalistic like that. He's saying, as you move through earth, your eyes are set on heaven. So as you report for work, it is to serve the King and build his kingdom. Ask yourself, what am I building with my life, with my work? And is what I'm building going to matter long term? Because you and I are invited to build the kingdom. Instead of building a resume, building a business, building a retirement, or building our empire, right? Our empire is the cool cars, the nice house, the fancy vacations, and dinner out at least a few times a week. Like if we could get to that place and then we can protect it and hold on to it, we'll be good. And Paul says, you don't take any of that with you, that's all going to fall apart anyway and not matter much. So why don't you invest your time and your skill and your talent and your energy and your focus in something more? And it starts by doing it for someone else. It's not about a different job. It's not about a different boss. It's about a different mindset. I mean, that's really what setting your sights on something is about. I'm going to move in this differently going forward. And it means more when you know who it's for. You show up differently. So I know I told you at the beginning, at no point in this am I going to encourage you to quit your job. But I do want to encourage you to not work another day. Don't work another day. Flip that to being, I'm going to serve every day. I'm not going to work for my boss or work for the man or work for the paycheck or work for the weekend or whatever the case may be. I am going to serve the King with what I do. Whether that's I'm a teacher in a classroom, I'm the CEO of a Fortune 500 company, or I drive a truck, or I'm a stay-at-home parent, or I'm a student in the classroom, I'm not going to work anymore. I'm going to serve the King. I'm going to give my very best as if it were Him Himself asking me to do it. And this is how I want to help you remember it. I love a good trigger thing. I know some of you are struggling with lights lately because of last week. I had somebody say that she was camping and she went into a porta-john in the middle of the night and it had an automatic light. She's like, 3 a.m., I'm thanking Jesus for all of this. What did you do to me? So I want to do that again. But you get to decide how you want to apply this. I'd love if you would find a sticky note and write these words on it: in service to the King. And I think you should put that sticky note wherever most represents your have to. So, a lot of my job is spent in front of a computer monitor, writing messages, planning things, emailing people, messaging staff, all of that. So this is actually my monitor and a sticker that I have on it that says in service to the King. So for you, it might go just inside your laptop. It might go just inside your folder that you carry to all the meetings with all the notes. It might be in your backpack. I don't know where it needs to be for you, but I think you should put it someplace that you'll see often where it reminds you to go, what I'm doing today, I am doing in service to the King. And what's amazing is, without realizing, some of your have-tos might become get-tos because of who you're doing it for now. What might feel like drudgery for a boss feels like an amazing opportunity for a king. What might feel like just surviving to get the paycheck could start to feel like investing in eternity. In maybe some very small ways, but meaningful ways nonetheless, because they're tied to something more. And as time goes on, you begin to realize that your have-tos can have meaning. And imagine for a minute what it would be like for you to wake up tomorrow and have meaning in your job that you did not have yesterday. Imagine what it would look like for you to wake up and go stand out at the bus stop and see it as something meaningful because you're going to even do that thing for the King. For those of you that are married, for just a minute, what would it be like? I'm not going to ask you to imagine for you because that's hard. Imagine for your spouse, no elbowing. If they came home from work tomorrow, having done work all day with meaning. You're like, man, sign me up. That would be amazing. For those of you who are not, can you imagine sitting down with your best friends later in the week and you're talking through your week, and as usual, everybody's just kind of complaining and groaning and moaning about all the things that they had to do and how awful it was, and you're sitting there going, I mean, I don't love my job, but I found some meaning in it. I had to show up, but in some strange way, I felt like I got to show up. Your friends will think that maybe you've had too many for the night, but you'll be able to go to sleep with a different mindset, not because you went and got a new job, not because you got a raise, but because you started doing what you do for somebody different. And that might be the moment where, at least for a time, you get to step off the struggle bus. Let's pray. God, we are so grateful that Paul wrote this letter and that it has, by your grace, survived thousands of years for us to read. And even though the culture is a little different, the principles behind it and how we should show up as your followers stand the test of time. And God, we're a community of people, I think, that really do want to be the best employees, no matter where we work. And it's not because our job is awesome or our boss is amazing, but because you are. And we're going to do it for you, in service to you. God, we're grateful that you infuse meaning into even the most insignificant, or so we feel, things in our life, simply because we can aim them in a different direction. We're grateful that you don't leave us on the struggle bus, that you don't, keep us there as prisoners, that you give us a way out, and always in you. So this week, help us to do whatever we do in service to you. Remind us in the moments where we're struggling and we're grumbling and we don't want to do, or we don't feel like we should do, or whatever, but we have to. Help us to remember that we get to do that with a different mindset than anybody else, because we get to do it for you. In Jesus' name, amen.